Hello, welcome to this review for, as the thumbnail predicted, Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. 5 out of 5 stars. Wow. This totally exceeded my expectations. There's so much hype for it. I was starting to think it's going to be good, but I may not love it that much because that's what hype does to me. It often disappoints. This one did not disappoint in any sense. It was really impressive. So I first heard about this book for the first time, I think, a couple of years ago. And it was definitely BookTube that gave it to me. And I'm pretty sure it was Matt over at Bookpilled who read this and loved it and reviewed it. Back when he was still reviewing on open YouTube and not private channels. And I thought, well, that actually sounds really interesting and I will look for it. So for a couple of years I looked for it in the wild and found not a hint, not a waft of any Strugatsky brother. And so recently I gave in, and as part of QBD membership, I got this brand new from SF Masterworks. And I don't always love Masterworks, but I actually do really like this edition. I think the cover art is quite nice. It's got comfortable heft and I enjoyed reading it. I think I'm slowly coming around to SF Masterworks after having been really disappointed with the first one I bought, which was James Blish, Cities in Flight. That might not be Masterworks' fault. It's a huge book. Anyway, aside. So, this one has got an introduction by Ursula Le Guin, or foreword by Ursula K. Le Guin, an afterword by Boris Strugatsky, and it is a new translation by Olena Bormashenko, which I may possibly be not pronouncing correctly, but there you go. I don't speak Russian. I feel like a good part of my enjoyment, maybe even up to 40% of it, is the translation. I think that Olena Bormashenko, whoever she is probably masterly. I have read a few Russian novels and translations of. I think Russian to English must be very difficult. And some novels rise or fall purely upon their translation. I am looking at Crime and Punishment, and I am looking at Anna Karenina straight in the face when I say that. Now, I don't know if it's a characteristic of the Russian language. I suspect not. But when in translation to English, it can come across as very heavy, very humorless, very formal, and very pompous at times. Of all the Russian books I read until the last 10 years, that has almost always been the case. You enjoy the book despite the writing, not because of the writing. Now, a couple of the exceptions were actually children's stories. Vasila the Beautiful, Vasila the Gentle was a fairy tale, and the most weird fairy tale you will ever encounter is The Strange Tale of Humpty Horse, translated from the Russian. That was amazing. And those are the ones that gave me some confidence that don't give up on Russian translations. It's possible. Olena did a beautiful job. So, a bit about the book. I'm not sure how much to say here. This has been reviewed quite extensively. It's a BookTube and a darling at the moment. It's no spoiler to say that the central concept of this is that there are these zones on Earth, and right in the first chapter, an excerpt from an interview with Dr. Valentine Pillman by a correspondent from Harmont Radio after the former received the 19-something or other Nobel Prize in Physics. And during this first chapter, the interviewer is asking Dr. Valentine Pillman about his discovery. And from this introduction, we learned quite subtly that about these zones. They're scattered all over Earth, and they can be calculated as having come on a semi-ballistic I think, trajectory from somewhere near Denham. Each one of these zones, we learn, has basically been visited by aliens, and there is a whole lot of stuff in them, alien weird stuff. And the title Roadside Picnic comes from a later chapter where Dr. Valentine is hypothesizing that while no one knows who these aliens were or what they did or what the zones really are or what happened, he's comparing it to a roadside picnic where a whole heap of people draw over, put down picnic baskets and have a bit of a picnic and a bit of game and then move on without cleaning up their trash. Making the aliens real bogans, I'm just going to say. And the insects that have escaped from the picnic come out and they look at all these items, and some of them are magical and some of them are weird and some of them are death. And those are the zones. Now, the zone that we're mostly associated in is one that we see primarily through a individual called Red Schuhart. He is the one character that we see all the way through the novel from the beginning to the end. And he is what's called a stalker. Apparently this book was the impetus for stalker entering the Russian language for a specific word. And I gather it's inspired a video game that I've never heard of and a movie from the 70s, which I rather feel that I have seen. I think that's why this sparked my interest so fast and why I came into it with such expectations. I think I saw and enjoyed the movie many, many years ago. So Red is a stalker, and he's one of those people who is from the town surrounding where this particular local zone, and he ventures into the zone against authority and against the law to pick up various items which he brings out and sells. So basically he's a smuggler of sorts. Our main character is a smuggler, and he is exceptionally well written and exceptionally well drawn for the reader. The items that come out of the zone, nobody really knows what they were intended for. People find uses for them, but there's, of course, no real way to know if those were the intended uses. And there's a scientific institute which has grown up near, I think there's one near every zone, but there's one near Red Zone to study things about him. Now, this actually comes to you in several different, not stories, but sections, each one of which is different to the other, and you're not given at the beginning of the book which ones they are. But the first one, we start with Red when he's quite young. He has been arrested he's 23 years old, single laboratory assistant in the Harmont branch of the International Institute of Extraterrestrial Cultures. So he, having been caught many times, he's gone straight, and he's working for the Institute, and he's drawing a salary, and it's all good. But his boss, who he likes, but really he's still a smuggler at heart, he's never totally given it up. And when his boss desperately wants, who he likes, desperately wants a particular item, he agrees to go into the zone with him to look for this item at which he knows where it is. And they find and retrieve that item, but there are repercussions. Our next section is when he's 28 years old, and at that stage he's married with a child. And we find out that the children of stalkers who go into the zone often aren't quite normal. Sometimes they're human, and we see a couple of examples of that, but often they are far from human, mutated or changed, and at one point there's even a mention of one not even being technically still human. So we then progress later on in the timeline, and the third section doesn't actually start with Red. It starts with Richard K. Noonan, 51 years old, a representative of electronic equipment suppliers to the Harmont branch of the IIEC, that's a scientific organisation. But we've met Noonan before. Red knows him as Dick. And throughout the book, we have this, and the last one is Redrick Schuhart, 31 years old. I think that's the last one. There might be one more. So we have this time progression, and we have this character development and progression. We have things continually happening, and very subtle is the way that the Strugatskys build up the town, the society that surrounds the zone, the zones themselves, and what they have and what they represent. Very, very subtle. And I think very, very well done. Because at the end of it, one feels that one has a perfect picture of the society, the town surrounding the zone, and I haven't by any means mentioned all the interesting things that happen around them or in them. So I think that's really all one can say about all this one can say about Roadside Picnic without really spoiling elements of it. And I went into it pretty cold. I didn't know too much about it. So for those people who would also like to go in cold, if you have this edition, one thing that, and I thoroughly recommend this translator, one thing I would recommend doing is do not read the foreword by Ursula K. Le Guin until after you've finished the book, for a couple of reasons. I know Ursula K. Le Guin is a legend in her own lunchbox and all the rest of it, but this foreword had a couple of problems. Now, I think that's probably, at least partially, because it's based on the review from Roadside Picnic that she wrote in 1977, when this first came out in the English language. That was a different translation. I think that's probably a part of it. The end of it has a couple of spoilers, and I was sad at those because I read it first out of a sense of obligation, and she told me a couple of things that I didn't know, and I'd have been just as happy not knowing but finding out organically in the story. Certainly the final promise, the final thing that happens in the last chapter, I really would have been perfectly happy not knowing that before I started the book. So if you haven't read it, and you haven't heard everything that happens in it, foreword by Ursula K. Le Guin, save it for afterward. That would be my guess. The afterword by Boris Strugatsky, Arkady having died by the time this was published, is really interesting. It's a bit hard reading for someone who doesn't know too much about Russian politics. Some of the things that they mention I know, but only peripherally. It is interesting though. I might come back and just read the afterword sometime, and I will definitely be looking out for more Strugatsky novels, especially if they're translated by Olena. Okay, now I'm going to delve into some spoilers, at least about the foreword, not the novel. So probably, if you've got any suspicion that you're going to read this book, and I would recommend reading it cold, and you would like to read it cold, perhaps quit at 12:50 and come back after you've read it. But this is one where all the hype in the world, I think, was worked for me. The first part is the best. Really the best. Yes, anyway, go away, spoilers. Most of my spoilers actually relate to the foreword, which I didn't like, and it annoyed me. And having read it, parts of it, the end was blemished, because, oh yeah, that's what Ursula said 200 and whatever pages ago, and I didn't love it. I didn't love that experience at all. But also, the foreword really, really confused me. In the intro, she says the setting appears to be in North America, perhaps Canada. That's batshit. I can't even imagine how anyone would think that if they'd actually read the book. Is it the name of the town? The name of the town is something ambivalent. Hampton? Hemet, which doesn't sound particularly Russian. But I cannot imagine anything about the society portrayed in this book successfully transplanting to America. This society, these people, these actions, they are all so Russian that I just, that K. Le Guin comment just bewildered me throughout. And the characters and the way they speak, they couldn't be more Russian if they had a flag tattooed on their forehead. This is not North America. What's she talking about? It really bugged me, as you can tell. Also, in the second section, we've got a character sitting in a cafe, fiddling with that napkin dispenser, I think it was, and remarking on the Cyrillic language imprinted in it. I mean, in what universe does Le Guin think that Cyrillic is imprinted on devices in North America? Cyrillic is a very specific language. It's a prototype language. About 50% of the Cyrillic living languages are in Russia. What's up? We want something. What do we want? We definitely want something. Attention. We want attention. Pretty soon. There'll be attention soon. Cyrillic. There's about 50% other languages that use the Cyrillic base, and Bulgaria, I happen to know, is one of them. But North America? What was she on? Yeah, so that really bothered me throughout. I don't think this book really deserved to have me all flustered over the foreword. The foreword is meant to make you want to read it and enjoy it more, so that's one of the reasons why I strongly recommend reading it after you've finished it. Roadside Picnic, of those sections, I loved the first one the best. That is your introduction to going into the zone, and it combines perfectly the mystery, the weird hell slime that can eat the bones out of your legs. That actually happens in the second segment, I believe. But all these strange objects are first introduced in that section so well. In the next sections, it's more about characters and interactions, and we see Red his life develop throughout in an interesting way. Another thing that went all the way through is the fact that in the first section, his girlfriend Guta tells him he's pregnant, and she's talking about wanting to keep it even though her mother wants her to get an abortion. And that's our introduction to how children of stalkers often come out strange. And then later on, their daughter does indeed come out strange, and that's something that we discover by increments of suspicion, because they talk about the fur, and we realize that her nickname Monkey is given to her because she is furred all over in what sounds like a red russet, similar to her father's characteristic hair, which is why he's called Red. Red himself is interesting. His life throughout is this interplay of the anger and aggression that a smuggler has towards the police that are trying to run him down, and the anger and aggression that he has towards the people who buy the things that he gets out of the zone at his own risk and at his own detriment, because he's now got a mutated child who later degenerates so much that a specialist calls her not even technically human anymore. But as a child, she's happy, and Red and his wife Guta are happy. One thing that you do often see in Russian writing is that slow, oppressive sense of misery descending on the characters in the world. And you definitely do get that in Russian Picnic. We start off with that relatively young, relatively light-hearted man in society going into the zone in a relatively fun and enjoyable expedition, which does kind of succeed. And then later on, we get a stronger look into what it means to be a smuggler coming out of the zone, and you get this knowledge that dead bodies are starting to rise out of the cemetery and go back to where they used to live. Just another weird side effect. And later in the book, we find out that there's more weird side effects worldwide from the zones and their influence around them. Anyway, there's not a lot really that I can say about this novel that I'm sure someone else hasn't said, except I personally enjoyed it a great deal. The first section was my favorite, but all of the sections were good. And the ending, it's hard to imagine an ending for this book that could satisfy better. I certainly can't. So, thank you for watching. If you've read this book, and I know some of you have, do please comment. Would love to discuss this book with other people who've read it sometime in the future, because it seems like such a rare and niche book. And I think it's great that it's coming back into maybe the common purveyance are having been published in 77. It's a remarkably modern book for one published in 77. It's clearly set in 77, yes. The setting is old, but the way in which it reads feels very contemporary, which I suspect we can once again thank Olena for. But thank you for watching. Read good books. Definitely read this one because this is definitely a good book. And thanks for watching.